for a good number of years now, best-selling books with the word wisdom in the title are almost always self-help or self-improvement books. I don't think that's what the author of the biblical book of Job had in mind. Even though Job is one of the oldest examples of wisdom literature in the Bible. Unlike today's self-help books, however, Job is not interested in our emotional, relational, entrepreneurial, or financial success. Job is wrestling with the very concept of wisdom itself. He's struggling to define its character and wondering why it is so scarce in the world, why it's so hard to find, and apparently concealed from even those who are most eager to find it. At least this much seems certain to Job. We cannot reduce wisdom to pithy slogans suitable for social media memes. We can't even contain it in our formal systems of logic. According to Job, God's wisdom often shows up where we are least likely to make sense of our experience. Like thunderstorms. Modern science has, of course, helped us to understand storms, where they form, why they form, how all these weather patterns and different things work together to create these storm systems. But that is not what I was thinking about as River and I huddled in the rectory basement earlier this year while the tornado siren was blaring in Douglas and the winds were howling and the rain was beating against the windows like gravel. Knowing how that turbulent line of thunderstorms formed did not lessen my anxiety one little bit. In fact, my experience, my 21st century experience of that storm was basically exactly the same experience as humans had 3,000 years ago of that storm. Uncertainty, trepidation and fear, anxiety, and toss in a little dose of awestruck wonder. Whatever wisdom is, Job seems to say, it begins with a posture of deep humility toward forces we cannot control in the face of the infinite mystery of the living God. St. Paul echoes that approach in his Corinthian correspondence in a whole series of contrasts. This world and God's world, flesh and spirit, foolishness and wisdom. And that series of contrasts culminates in the 15th chapter of his first letter to the Corinthians, a letter from which we heard a little portion this morning. In that 15th chapter, Paul insists on the centrality of Easter in Christian faith, of the risen Jesus. And he contrasts the physical body of decay with the spiritual body of resurrection. And it's in that chapter that the reader finally realizes Paul is not creating binary distinctions. He's inviting us to see their uncanny unity. Just like the seed falls in the earth and dies, it then brings forth a harvest of life. The cross of Christ sits at the very heart of this letter in this series of contrasts. God is with us, is the message of the cross. God is with us fully, holding nothing back. God is with us in this world, in our mortal flesh, through all of our foolish choices, in order to transform this world with divine wisdom and new life. God is with us. This is now the third week in a row that we have heard Paul insist repeatedly, that God's wisdom will always seem foolish to the world around us. Seeing the world as God sees it does inspire a way of life that seems not only foolish, but weak, useless, impractical. Not much self-improvement involved. And yet, and still, the self-offering of Christ on the cross is the very power and wisdom of God, Paul says. And seeing this liberates us. It frees us to live and love as God does. Our English word, you knew I'd get here eventually, right? I love etymology and where our words come from. Our English word wisdom comes from an old Indo-European word that means simply to see. Not so much to know or to understand, but to see clearly. The Greek word for wisdom is Sophia, which evokes sometimes a sense of academic learning and expertise, but mostly it's for the sake of sound judgment. Again, it's that sense of being able to see and discern clearly. As Luke might say, gospel wisdom emerges from seeing the world differently. Not the way we were raised, not how we were brought up, not how the wider culture wants us to see it, but to see it differently. I was reflecting on that notion of seeing differently when I was aboard the tall ship Friends Goodwill that I sail on my days off out of South Haven. I just did this past Friday. After we navigate the harbor channel and we push beyond the pier heads, a good wind can take us out a good couple of miles out onto the lake. And from that distance, the shoreline becomes something new. Sure, you can see landmarks and some familiar features there, but it does not look like the shore we left behind. That experience shapes my reading of this very familiar story from Luke's account of the gospel this morning. There are multiple ways to read these stories, as I'm sure you know. You can read them right at face value. That's fine. Jesus calms a storm. You can read it as part of a larger plot that the gospel writer's creating. for the sake of a bigger message. You can also read it, as early Christians often did, metaphorically, analogically, symbolically. So when Jesus this morning says, hey, he said, hey, let us cross over to the other side of the lake. This isn't just Luke giving us a little bit of storytelling context here. Luke is giving us a geographical clue about the spiritual character of faith, about faith as a journey. The lake in this story is the world. And crossing to the other side changes our perception of it. It's the same world, but seen differently. They pushed off from shore, Luke says. They launched themselves into this brand new way of seeing the world, this brand new way of living. And of course, there's a storm. The storm on the sea indicates how difficult it is to shift our perception. This transition to a different way of seeing is not easy. It's stormy, and there's no way to go back. Once you see the world differently, you can't unsee it. The wind keeps them from going back. Remember, the wind is an image of the Spirit. And still, and yet, God is present. Asleep for a little while, but present. Present in this stormy crossing, right in the midst of the storm. God is with us. I want to invite us to take that story and its images and its gospel reassurance into today's situation. And I want to suggest that this gospel passage is urging us to see ourselves and this precious earth differently. And then to change how we live. Our climate crisis today demands new vision, and it will mean crossing a very stormy sea. These days, quite literally, a stormy sea. But also metaphorically stormy. What I mean is there are powerful storm-like forces at work in this world determined to prevent us from seeing the world differently. For Luke, those powerful forces were the Roman Empire. Remember, the context for all of these New Testament texts is the colonization and occupation of Palestine by Rome. For us, those forces are of the modern Western society in which we live. Our modern conveniences, our reliance on fossil fuels, ongoing racial hostilities, patriarchal control of women's bodies, the decimation and plundering of ecosystems for resources. All of these have enormous amounts of money and power attached to them. And there are powerful forces who do not want us to see differently. I know, sounds like I'm being woke. So I want to give you a very specific example this morning of these forces determined to keep us from seeing. And one among many is the plastics industry. Beginning in the early 1980s, a massive marketing campaign began to persuade us to recycle plastic. This campaign emerged in concert with fossil fuel companies because plastic, of course, is made from crude oil and natural gas. This campaign began at almost exactly the same time that industry executives were informed by their own research departments that recycling plastic is inefficient, too expensive, and in many cases, chemically impossible. This campaign continues today. One commentator has called it a decades-long campaign of deception. And we are now on track toward tripling the volume of plastic production by the year 2060. We're not recycling, we're not reducing the amount of plastic, and we are increasing the production. Even though less than 10%, did you hear that number? Less than 10% of global plastic waste can even be recycled. So the vast majority of it ends up in our landfills, or it's burned, or it's dumped in oceans, lakes, and rivers. Today, every human body, each of you, all of us, and every animal on earth, and every ecosystem on this planet contains microplastics. From the deepest ocean bed to the tallest mountain peak. It's in your brain tissue right now. It's in your heart muscle. It's in your arteries. It's in my precious River's body. It's in Wallace's body. We have got to see the world differently and then live differently. I'm not saying it's easy, but we have to cross the lake. We have to pass through a storm, and we have to arrive to another shore. It's the same world, different vision. That's wisdom. This moment in which we're living is exactly the kind of moment for which the world's religious traditions were made. This is why we come here every week, to come to this table so that we can be equipped to be a counter-cultural community. My Berkeley hippie roots coming out. To help us see the world with gospel vision, and then especially to find the courage to live differently. Let's get in the boat. Let's cross the lake. Don't be afraid. God with us.